I never imagined that the place I once called home, the place filled with childhood memories and echoes of simpler days, would become the setting for one of the most unexpected mornings of my life. Certainly not because of my stepmother, Diane. At 62, she was the epitome of elegance and warmth, the kind of woman whose presence had a gravity all its own. When I moved back into my father's house after college, I knew there would be adjustments. I was prepared for awkward dinners, maybe a few tense silences, but never this. Never her. It was a quiet Tuesday in early spring. The kind of morning where sunlight gently filters through the blinds and everything feels a little too calm, like the world is holding its breath. I had just come back to town, diploma in hand, dreams bigger than my bank account, and hope clinging to my shoulders like a second skin. My plan was simple. Stay with Dad and Diane for a few months, get on my feet, find a job and move out. What could go wrong? Dad had remarried while I was away. Diane, his new wife, was nothing like the caricature of a stepmother I had expected. She was soft-spoken yet confident, with a quick wit and eyes that hinted at stories she hadn't told yet. We connected easily, naturally, sometimes more so than I did with my own father, who often remained absorbed in his work and barely home. That morning I was in the upstairs bathroom, nervously preparing for an interview I'd been dreaming about since sophomore year. I had already gone over my answers 100 times in my head, but my heart still thudded with nervous anticipation. The shower had been running for a while, the bathroom thick with steam that clung to the walls and turned the mirror into a blurred canvas. I was standing there, towel slung low around my waist, wiping the fog from the glass so I could straighten my tie and maybe, just maybe, calm the storm in my chest. I hadn't heard the door open. I hadn't noticed the footsteps. But the moment I saw her reflection behind me in the mirror, Diane standing silently in the threshold, I felt something shift. Something I couldn't yet name but would never forget. As I stood before the mirror, heart racing and tie half knotted, I ran through my interview answers for what felt like the 1,000th time. My breath fogged up the glass again and again, forcing me to keep wiping it clean with the edge of a towel. The pressure of wanting everything to go perfectly felt like it was pressing into my chest, making each breath just a little harder to take. I needed this job. I needed a win. And I was doing my best to keep it all together, despite the nerves crackling under my skin. Then came a gentle knock on the bathroom door. Soft but deliberate. "Hey, Eli." Diane's voice floated through the wood, her tone warm, almost apologetic. "Are you in there?" "Yeah, Diane," I called back, trying to sound light and composed. "Just getting ready for the interview." There was a short pause, just long enough to feel slightly off. "I'm really sorry to bother you," she said, her voice lower now, more hesitant. "But I need to grab something from the cabinet in there. Would that be okay?" I hesitated for half a second, my mind already flitting back to my talking points about teamwork and adaptability. "Yeah, of course," I said, swiping at the mirror again. "No problem, come on in." The doorknob turned slowly, and the door creaked open. Diane stepped inside with the same grace she always carried, a calm kind of elegance that never seemed forced. She wore a pale blue robe that looked almost silken in the low light, and her silver hair was swept into a loose bun at the nape of her neck, a few strands tumbling free like wisps of smoke. I expected her to just reach into the cabinet, grab what she needed and go. But something about her movements that morning felt different, slower, almost deliberate. As she bent slightly to open the drawer beneath the sink, I caught sight of her robe shifting, the loose tie around her waist slipping an inch too far. It fell open just enough to reveal a glimpse of her bare shoulder, smooth and lightly freckled, the curve of her collarbone drawing my eyes before I could even think to look away. A jolt ran through me. Guilt, confusion, something unnameable, and I quickly averted my gaze, my face flushing hot despite the coolness of the bathroom tiles beneath my bare feet. I cleared my throat, forcing the words out through the thick tension that had suddenly settled in the air. "Everything okay?" She didn't respond immediately. Her hand lingered in the drawer, fingers brushing through bottles and brushes as if she couldn't find what she was looking for, or didn't want to. The silence stretched, charged with something I didn't understand, something I wasn't sure I wanted to. Diane turned toward me with a light, amused smile dancing in her eyes, the kind of expression that felt like sunlight filtering through a cloudy day. "Oh, I'm fine," she said, her voice soft and familiar, like the gentle pages of an old book. She held up a small amber bottle between two fingers. "Just needed some aspirin. These early mornings sneak up on me more than they used to." Her robe shifted slightly as she straightened, the delicate fabric catching the light and clinging softly to the curves of her body. I forced my gaze back to the mirror, willing myself to stay focused. "Nervous about your interview?" she asked, and I caught the warmth in her tone. Genuine, encouraging. "A little," I admitted, clearing my throat, trying to hold my composure. But the truth was, my nerves had nothing to do with the interview anymore. My thoughts had gone off script, tangled somewhere between confusion and something I couldn't quite name. Diane's smile deepened, kind and reassuring. "You'll do great, Landon. Just be yourself. You've always had that quiet strength. It shows in everything you do. They'll see it. You just have to let them." Something in her words hit me harder than I expected, like she wasn't just talking about the job, like she saw something in me that even I had trouble finding. I nodded slowly, heart thudding, caught between gratitude and something dangerously close to awe. Diane had always had this way about her, making you feel seen, like you mattered in ways you hadn't considered before. In that moment, her support meant more than I could say. She turned to leave, but in that small movement, everything changed. The sash of her robe slipped free without warning, the knot unraveling as if time itself had tugged at the thread. The fabric fell open completely. It happened so fast, and yet it felt like the entire world froze around us. For a single surreal second, she stood there in the soft morning light, completely exposed, the robe hanging useless at her sides. Her skin caught the warm glow from the window, every line and curve etched into my memory in a heartbeat I couldn't take back. My breath hitched, caught between shock and the impossible reality unfolding before me. Her eyes widened as she realized what had happened, and a startled gasp escaped her lips. She scrambled to clutch the robe shut, her cheeks flushing crimson, hands trembling as she fumbled with the belt. "Oh my God, Landon, I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice cracking under the weight of her embarrassment. I didn't realize. I thought it was tied." I spun around instinctively, heat crawling up my neck, my own thoughts a chaotic blur. It's okay," I muttered, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the rush of the shower behind me. "It was an accident, right?" "Right," she echoed, her voice a whisper now, still laced with shame. She tightened the robe hastily, still facing away. "Just a stupid accident. Please, don't say anything to your father, okay? He'd be so upset. It would mean so much to me if you didn't." I stood there, facing the wall, caught in a whirlwind of emotion. Confusion, guilt, shock, and something else I didn't want to name. Everything about that morning had shifted. And I knew, even without turning back around, that nothing would be quite the same after it. I nodded slowly, still reeling from the moment that had just unraveled before me. My voice felt distant, almost disconnected as I murmured, "Of course. It's our secret." Diane gave me a final flustered glance, her eyes wide with a cocktail of embarrassment and something else I couldn't quite name, then turned and slipped out of the bathroom. The door clicked shut behind her, but it felt like the echo lingered far longer than it should have. For a while I just stood there, my hands gripping the edges of the sink as if it was the only thing keeping me grounded. My reflection in the mirror looked pale, stunned, like I had just witnessed something that didn't belong in the ordinary fabric of a Tuesday morning. My chest rose and fell in uneven breaths, the bathroom still foggy with steam, yet I felt cold inside, flushed, shaken, and impossibly distracted. I couldn't believe it. Diane, my 62-year-old stepmother, had walked in, reached for a bottle of aspirin, and unintentionally exposed herself right in front of me. But it wasn't just that. It was everything. The way her robe had fallen open like it was meant to, the brief, frozen moment when our eyes met, and the look on her face. It wasn't just embarrassment. There was something behind it. A flicker of something unspoken. Something that felt dangerously close to curiosity. Or even acknowledgement. I tried to shake it off, tried to go through the motions of the day. I put on my suit, walked into the interview with my resume clutched in my hand, forced a smile. But my mind wasn't there. I barely remember the questions they asked, let alone what I said in response. Every time I tried to focus, that moment came rushing back. The shimmer of her skin in the light, the breathless apology, the way she'd pulled her robe tight as though she was holding in something more than just modesty. The rest of the day was a blur. I avoided Diane, unsure of what to say, unsure of what I wanted to say. She, on the other hand, acted like nothing had happened. She moved through the house as usual, humming softly as she folded laundry, flipping through a magazine on the living room couch, her expression unreadable. But there was something new hanging in the air between us, a tension that hadn't been there before. It wasn't overt, but it was undeniable. A lingering static, like the silence before a summer storm. That night I went to bed earlier than usual, hoping sleep might be a reset button. But it never came. I just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the events of the morning playing on a loop in my mind. My thoughts kept circling back to her. To Diane. I hated that I couldn't stop thinking about it. About her. Felt wrong. Was wrong. But it didn't stop my heart from racing every time her image flashed in my mind. She wasn't just my stepmother anymore. Not in my head. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds in pale ribbons. I shuffled into the kitchen, still groggy, and found a single piece of paper on the table. A short note in her careful, slanted handwriting. "Then we need to talk." That was all it said. Just 6 words. But they hit me like a punch to the chest. My heart picked up pace as I read it again, the paper trembling slightly between my fingers. What did she want to talk about? Had she told my dad? Was she planning to explain it all away, or was there something more beneath the surface? Something she'd been thinking about as much as I had. I crumpled the note in my fist, my thoughts spiraling. My dad was out of town for the week. Just Diane and me in the house. No buffer. No distractions. I needed to clear my head. So I left. I stepped outside and wandered to the nearby park, the cool morning breeze brushing against my skin as I moved through the winding paths. Families passed by. Joggers loped ahead. Birds chirped overhead. Normal life happening all around me while my own thoughts churned with impossible weight. And no matter how far I walked, I couldn't escape it. That image. That moment. Diane's face, flushed with shock. And something else. Something that still hadn't let me go. By the time I made it back to the house, the sky had dipped into shades of amber and violet, the sun slowly sinking behind the trees, casting long shadows across the lawn. The neighborhood was quiet, still, like the world was holding its breath. As I approached the front door, I glanced through the kitchen window. There she was, Diane, moving gracefully from counter to stove, her figure silhouetted in the golden light. Her silver hair was pinned up neatly, and she was humming faintly, a soft tune I couldn't quite place. She looked calm on the outside, composed, every motion purposeful. But I knew better. There was a subtle tension in the way her shoulders moved, too deliberate, like she was trying to control every part of herself. I drew in a breath, deep and steadying, then pushed open the door. The warm, savory scent of roasted chicken hit me immediately, mingling with hints of thyme and garlic. The table had been set neatly for 2. Cloth napkins folded at the sides, candles lit, soft jazz playing low from the speaker in the corner. It felt like something out of a memory, or a dream I wasn't sure I belonged in. "Hey, Caleb," Diane said as she turned to greet me, her smile gentle but not quite reaching her eyes. There was something brittle beneath the surface, a flicker of nervous energy barely contained. "I made your favorite. Hope you're hungry." I nodded, offering her a faint smile as I slid into the chair across from hers. "Thanks. It smells amazing." She busied herself with the last few touches, placing a bowl of roasted potatoes between us before finally taking her seat. We began eating, and for a while we both pretended everything was fine. The clink of silverware and soft murmur of music filled the silence we couldn't break. We talked about trivial things. My interview, the weather, a new show on Netflix. But each word felt like a placeholder, like we were both circling the edge of a truth neither of us knew how to name. I kept sneaking glances at her, trying to decipher the quiet storm I sensed behind her eyes. And I could feel her doing the same. Every brush of her hand against the table, every long pause before she spoke. It was like we were both afraid that saying too much might crack something wide open. Finally, when our plates were empty and the last of the wine had been sipped, Diane set her fork down and folded her hands in her lap. Her expression shifted, softened but more serious. "Caleb," she began, her voice low and measured. "About what happened yesterday." I met her gaze, my heart stuttering slightly. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I've been thinking about it too." She exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping as though she'd been holding her breath this entire time. One hand rose to her temple, then swept gently through her hair in a familiar, nervous gesture. "I don't know how to say this," she murmured, her words trembling with sincerity, "but I think we need to be honest with each other." I leaned in slightly, my breath catching. "What happened in the bathroom?" she continued, her voice breaking on the edge of the thought. "It wasn't just an accident. I mean, yes, it was. But it also wasn't." She paused, as though the air itself had thickened around her. "I didn't plan it," she said quickly, searching my face, her eyes wide and vulnerable. "I didn't mean for it to happen, but when it did, I didn't feel just embarrassed. Felt something else. And I don't know what to do with that." Her confession hung between us like smoke, unsettled, delicate, impossible to ignore. I sat there in stunned silence, heart pounding, not sure whether to speak, to stand, to lean forward, or to run. Because whatever came next, there was no going back. It was a feeling I hadn't expected, one I thought I'd grown too old, too guarded, too jaded to ever feel again. A storm of emotion I'd buried deep inside began to stir, rising to the surface with alarming force. I stood frozen in the quiet of the living room, blinds casting long shadows across the floor as late sunlight poured in, turning everything a deep golden hue. My heart pounded like a drum in my chest, loud enough that I was sure she could hear it. I had braced myself for something else entirely, for denial, for awkward apologies, for her to chalk everything up to a moment of weakness and beg to leave it behind us. But what she said instead struck me like lightning. "Clara, what are you saying?" I asked, my voice so low it barely registered in the stillness between us. She looked at me then, really looked at me with eyes that shimmered not just with tears but with something else. Something raw. Her chest rose as she took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'm saying I've felt this, whatever this is, for a long time," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I didn't plan it. I never even let myself think it aloud. But yesterday changed something in me. It opened a door I didn't know was even there. And I think you felt it too, didn't you?" My world tilted slightly on its axis. Words tumbled inside my head but refused to line up into coherent thoughts. I could feel the truth of her words like a current buzzing just beneath my skin. I had felt it, that unspoken energy between us, the way her laughter lingered in my thoughts longer than it should have, the way her presence somehow quieted everything else in my life. Clara wasn't just beautiful. She was luminous. She had this warmth about her, this quiet wisdom and strength that drew me in like a moth to a flame. She listened in a way no one else did, saw through the masks I wore without trying. That connection had always been there, subtle, unspoken, but real. And yet, she was my stepmother, my father's wife, the woman who had sat at our dinner table, who had picked up his dry cleaning and kissed his cheek. This, whatever this was, felt dangerous, impossible. "Well, I don't know what to say," I murmured, feeling a heavy weight settle on my chest. "You're married to my dad. That's not something I can just forget." "I know," she said softly, her voice catching in her throat. "I love him, I do. But it's not the same. It's not this. What I feel for you. It's like we speak the same language, even in silence. I've never had that with anyone before. Not even with him." Her hand reached out slowly, almost hesitantly, until her fingers brushed mine. The contact was electric, tender, cautious, but searing with emotion. I should have pulled away. Every rational part of me screamed that I should. But I didn't. Couldn't. Instead, I found myself leaning in, drawn to her as if gravity itself had shifted between us. My pulse raced as her breath mingled with mine, her eyes flickering down to my lips for just a second before meeting my gaze again. Clara, I started, the words catching in my throat. But before I could finish, she leaned in, closing the distance. Her lips found mine in a kiss that was impossibly soft, fragile, like the flutter of a moth's wings. It was a question, a confession, and a plea all wrapped into one trembling moment. I froze, caught between the instinct to flee and the overwhelming desire to fall into her. And then something inside me broke free. All the tension, the stolen glances, the subtle brushes of hands and lingering smiles, we both felt it all surge up in that moment. I kissed her back, my hands rising to her arms, feeling her warmth, her trembling as I pulled her against me. There was no logic in that moment. No guilt, no barriers. Just two people standing on the edge of something terrifying and beautiful, finally daring to step into the fire. For a moment it was like the world stopped spinning. Time folded in on itself and everything, every rule, every consequence, every reason to say no, just vanished. There was no past, no future. Just Clara and me, tangled in a moment we didn't fully understand but couldn't escape. Her breath against my lips, the tremble in her fingertips as they rested against my cheek. It was all so real, so overwhelming. But then reality came crashing in like a wave pulling me under. I broke the kiss, stumbling back a step as though I'd touched something scalding. My chest heaved, breath coming in short, uneven gasps. The porch around us blurred at the edges, my mind spinning in 1,000 directions, none of them leading to a place that made any sense. Clara, I said, the name barely forming through the storm in my chest. We can't do this. My voice cracked, raw and full of something between fear and longing. What about Dad? What about us? What does this mean? She looked up at me slowly, her face caught in the soft glow of the porch light. Her eyes wide and shimmering with a chaos that mirrored my own. Her lips were still slightly parted, her breath shallow. Desire warred with shame in her gaze, and the quiet crack in her composure nearly broke me. I don't know, Noah, she whispered, her voice strained. I wish I did. I can't lie to myself anymore. I feel something for you. Something I've tried to ignore. But you're right, we can't pretend this didn't happen. We have to figure out what we're doing before we destroy everything. I nodded, though the gesture felt empty. My heart was heavy, aching with guilt and confusion. I didn't have answers. Not a single one. All I knew was that we'd shattered something tonight. Some fragile line we were never supposed to cross, and there was no going back. We sank into silence, the weight of what we'd done pressing down on us like a storm cloud too thick to see through. I sat on the opposite end of the porch, needing space to breathe, to think, even though I already knew that space wouldn't make any of this easier. The next few days blurred into one another. Clara and I tried to act normal around each other, but the air between us was thick with unspoken words and unfinished glances. We moved through the house like ghosts, polite, careful, but always a little too aware of where the other was. When my dad returned from his business trip, nothing seemed out of place to him. He came through the door with his usual tired smile and a bag of takeout, oblivious to the emotional minefield buried beneath the surface of our home. I forced a smile, laughed when I needed to, but underneath I was unraveling. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes I saw her, the way her eyes locked on mine, the way her voice had trembled when she said my name, the softness of her lips as they met mine. I threw myself into job applications, desperate to distract myself, to reclaim some sense of normalcy. But the pull toward Clara never faded. She haunted every quiet moment, every breath I took alone. One evening, almost a week later, I found her sitting outside on the porch again. The sky was painted in strokes of pink, violet, and molten gold, the last light of the day casting her in a soft, almost ethereal glow. She didn't look up as I stepped outside, but I knew she'd heard me. I eased into the seat beside her, the wooden slats creaking beneath me, and we sat in silence, the hum of cicadas filling the space between us. Clara's hands were folded in her lap, her posture tense, but there was something thoughtful in the way she stared at the horizon. I watched her for a moment, unsure if I should speak. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said quietly, her voice barely louder than the wind in the trees. "About us. About what happened that night." My throat tightened, but I nodded. "Me too. I haven't been able to stop." She finally turned to look at me. Her expression was serious. No flirtation, no hesitation, just raw, unfiltered honesty. And for the first time I realized just how deep this thing between us really went. This wasn't just about a kiss. It wasn't just a mistake or a fantasy. This was a reckoning. "I think we need to make a decision, Liam," Clara said softly, her voice tight with emotion, as if each word cost her something to say. "Either we end this now, before it becomes something we can't take back, or we stop pretending and face whatever this is. Together." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and unrelenting. The kind of silence that follows a confession you can't unhear. I swallowed hard, the back of my throat dry, my thoughts tangled in 1,000 what-ifs and maybes. She was right. We couldn't keep walking this razor's edge, pretending we were just two people under the same roof, when everything inside us was screaming otherwise. It was a slow unraveling, and each stolen glance, each lingering touch, pulled us deeper into something neither of us was prepared for. "What do you want, Clara?" I asked finally, my voice barely more than a whisper. I could barely bring myself to breathe as I waited for her answer. She turned to me slowly, and when our eyes met, the pain in hers nearly broke me. Her gaze held so much: longing, fear, love, and the crushing weight of consequence. The late twilight framed her face in soft hues of lavender and gold, casting a glow over her that made her seem unreal, like something out of a dream I didn't want to wake up from. "I don't know, Liam," she said, her voice catching. "I want you. That's the only thing I'm sure of. But I don't want to be the reason everything falls apart. I don't want to hurt your dad. I don't want to destroy the family we've tried to build." "I don't want that either," I murmured, the ache in my chest sharp and deep. "But I also can't keep pretending that this feeling doesn't exist, that you don't mean something to me. 'Cause you do, Clara. You always have." She looked down at our hands resting in our laps, her fingers brushing against mine as if testing the waters of one last touch. Then, with trembling certainty, she reached over and took my hand into hers, folding our fingers together. "Maybe we need time," she said gently, "to breathe, to figure out what this really is. Not in secret, not in guilt, but with clarity. I don't want this to be something we regret. I want to know for sure." Her hand was warm, her touch grounding. I held onto her tightly, like I was afraid letting go would mean losing everything that had grown between us. Quietly, unexpectedly, but undeniably real. "Yeah," I said, nodding. "Maybe space is what we need. Just enough to see through all the noise." We didn't speak after that. We didn't need to. As the sun dipped behind the hills and the last light faded into dusk, we sat on the porch in silence, our hands still entwined. The air around us grew cooler, but her touch remained steady. Something had shifted. We both felt it, like the moment before a storm, thick with tension, with the promise of change. We didn't have a plan. We didn't have answers. Just 1,000 questions and a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. But in that moment, despite the uncertainty and the ache in our hearts, we had each other. And for now, that was enough.